So previously, we've looked at JavaScript and some of the basic instructions we get in a JavaScript program. In this video, I want to focus a little bit more on some of the features that are unique to JavaScript when we use it as a standalone programming language, like we're going to do for our server-side code. In particular, we're going to be looking at the FS module, which is a bundle of extra functions that let us read from files. We'll see how a module is imported and how we can even write our own modules to group different parts of our program in different files. Finally, we're going to look at a specific type of function that's really common in JavaScript. This is what's called an asynchronous function, and it's one that doesn't wait to have the entire answer before your program continues. We'll look at how we can handle asynchronous functions with callbacks, with promises, and with the async and await keywords. We're going to do all of this while doing a fun little programming exercise. I'll make a program that can read a shopping list and read some prices. But with that, we're ready to begin. So for our program, I'm going to be reading from a groceries txt file. And this thing's going to be a database of a bunch of fruits. Let's say an apple costs $1.30. A banana costs $1.09, some cherries cost $5.99, and this information in this file is a database that has details I want to be able to use in my JavaScript program. So for this to be the case, first I need a JavaScript program. I'm going to call mine main.js. You could call yours whatever you wanted. But in this file, in order to read from my txt, I have to use a function that doesn't come with JavaScript by default. Whenever this is the case, I need to go and import that other file. There are half a dozen different ways to do this in JavaScript, but the one I strongly prefer is the import statement. It works the most like other languages, and it's sort of the path forward in the future in JavaScript. The way I write an import statement is first the word import, then whatever I'm naming the thing that I'm importing and the specific pieces I want from wherever that thing is located as a string. So for the FS module that knows how to read from files, I just put FS inside quotes. And once I'm done that, I actually got functions that let me read from files really simply in just one line. What I want to do now is make myself a function for reading the groceries. Say, oh, well, you give me a file path and I'll do that reading for you. In here, I'm now ready to read from the file. And I say, okay, FS, I want you to read a file, whatever that file path is, and then provide it what the encoding of that file is. 99 times out of 100, that's going to be UTF-8. So I'm going to go ahead and put that. But the last thing I need to do is tell JavaScript what should happen once the file is read. The simple ideal solution would be that I get some return and then I'm able to use that return. Sadly, JavaScript is not nearly that convenient. There actually is a read file sync function that works that way. But in this video, we're getting some practice with asynchronous functions. So the reality is, when you call fs read file, JavaScript is not going to wait to finish reading the file. It's actually going to continue the program right away. Eventually, when that file is done, you have to tell the language, okay, now that you're done, here is the set of tasks I want you to do. And that actually typically gets written in a separate function. Because it is so specific to this one place we're calling it, normally we inline that function with arrow syntax. This is just a fancy way of writing a function where I say, here are my parameters, here's my function body, and I'm not going to bother giving it a name. I'm not going to bother putting it somewhere so that I could reuse it because I know it's only being used right here. For read file, the two parameters that get passed into the function are any errors that happened, you'll get error messages first, and then the contents of the file here. So in this case, I've got some contents of this file and I want to split this thing up. It's one giant string that is the whole file. Maybe I'm building a price database out of the file and I know this will be a list. So I start with an empty list. And then for each line of that entire contents split up on lines, take each one of those lines and get me the name and the price, which I can get by taking that line and splitting it up every time there's a comma. And now that I've got the name and the price into my prices database, I want to push that object with a name and a price. If I do this, by the time I get to the end of this for loop, what this is going to do is say, contents is this entire string. For each line, so do it for this one, and then this one, and then this one. Take that line and split it into chunks. So I've got the apple as the first thing in an array, the price as the second thing in an array. Distribute those out into a name variable and a price variable, and then build a JSON object with those curly braces to shove it in here. So I've done that. And to prove this, I can even console log my price database at the end of this function here. Then finally go and call my read groceries with a groceries.txt. If I do this and then I use bun to run my main.js, when I do this, you can see I've got my entire list of these grocery objects right here. And this works, but you might already be noticing that it's a little bit cumbersome. I might decide, oh, well, there are multiple reasons I want to read a file. And if I were trying to break this up, I might need to pass functions into functions into functions. And the deeper and deeper this gets, the more I'm going to have to indent, the messier my code will look. So first, to clean up, I'm actually going to drag out this little object creation piece. I'm going to create a separate file that describes this. If you remember from my JavaScript review video, there is this class keyword that lets us describe an object that we make over and over again. We've already got 3 groceries. If this text file were full, we might have several hundred more. I'm going to say every grocery has a name and a price. When you build it, you give me some text version of that grocery, and then it's my job here to split that thing off. Say, take that text version and split it on the comma. Give me those 2 components, name and price. And then once you've got that name and price, save them into our attributes of our class. I'm even going to convert my text price into a numeric price. This is an important note about files. The only thing JavaScript knows is that this thing was typed up in a file, so it must be text. If you want that text to be a number, you have to tell it to be a number with a parse function. But now I've written this nice, neat little description here. If I want to use this in another file, I can import this just like we imported fs. To do that, I need to make it public to the rest of my program, and I do that in JavaScript with the export keyword. You can put export in front of any variable, in front of any function, in front of any class, and then in my other file, I can import whatever that thing is, in our case, grocery, from // and then the file name. So in my case, //grocery, because I've got this grocery.js. This lets me import this thing, and now I can replace those 2 lines with just a price database, push me a new grocery from that line. If I run this again, we can see now all of these little objects are labeled. We've actually got that they are grocery objects here. The prices are numbers and not strings. That's a small improvement. But let's look at another way that we could have written this program using a feature called promises. So in JavaScript, there's actually a lot of stuff attached to this FS module. In addition to being able to import a module directly, I can import just a piece of it. So on FS, there is this fs.promises thing. It is an object inside the FS object. And this actually has its own version of read file that's going to look almost identical. It still has a groceries.txt. It still takes in the encoding UTF-8. But what this promises version of FS read file gives us is a return. Unlike last time, we actually get something back, but it's not what you'd expect. If I console log this contents here, what I'm actually going to get back when I run my main promises version here is not all of the text. I might expect, oh, well, everything that's in there, I should get it. Instead, I just get this promise that eventually I'll get the context. Whatever was in that file will come to me, just not right now because JavaScript is busy. So this is the idea of a promise. And in order to use a promise, we need to call a .then function on the promise. So in this case, I've got these, I'm going to actually call them eventual contents. If I want to use that eventual contents, I have to say eventual contents, when you're done, then give me that contents. This is a callback, just like the callback before, but now we've split it up onto two lines. And here, once you've given me that contents, now I can do that same splitting that I did before. Maybe I contents dot split it on the new line. And if you've got a loop that all your loop is doing is creating a new list from an old list, there's actually a fancier way to write that in JavaScript. We can dot map that line to whatever that line is going to turn into, in our case, a new grocery made from that line. And this gives me some eventual list of groceries. Our price database is what we called it in the other file. Once I've got this thing, I can return it from my then, and now I've got some eventual price database. And unfortunately, it's still trapped in promised land. If I try to console log my eventual price database, I'm going to have that same thing happen where, well, first, it can't find grocery because I haven't actually imported grocery yet. But once I do that and I run this, I still have a promise, but I have transformed that promise to have text into a promise to have a database. And the neat thing is I can chain these promises together one after the next. I can say, oh, well, once you've got the database, then using that database, print that thing out for me and show me what's in there. And if I do that, now you can see we've got that same object that we had last time. We have the list that contains each of the prices of our fruits. This doesn't sound like too much of an improvement yet, but the nice gain that we got here is now, whenever we want to chain more functionality onto something, it doesn't need to be an entirely separate block inside a block inside a block. We can instead make it more linear, one after the next. And in fact, we can even compose these promises in fairly clever ways. As an example of this, say our purpose in writing this groceries program was that I've got some shopping list where I want to buy 2 apples and a banana. And I want to know how much all of that costs together. In our promises code here, I can create a second promise, the eventual shopping list that I pull in from my shopping list file. I pull in that file, I've got it here. Once I've gotten it, then I can do something. You can even chain the .then right off of the previous function. I'm going to say, oh, well, with that contents, I actually want you to split it up every time there's a new line. So now I've got one fruit on each line. Return that to me. So here's my promise that eventually I'll have all the prices. Here's my promise that eventually I will have everything that I want to buy. I can actually say in JavaScript, take all of those promises together. This eventual price database, this eventual shopping list, take both of those. And when all of them are done, then with those two pieces, so with the database and with the desired items, give me both of them. And in here, here's stuff that I want to do as soon as all of the parts are ready. If we had tried to do this with callbacks, this would have been a messy, janky combination of a bunch of different variables holding state. We would have had to have one inside the other, and probably they would have had to happen in order. But this way, we've kind of cut it into modular pieces and said, hey, well, each one of these pieces, once they're all done, work on them any order you want, then here is some extra step I want to do. And maybe in this case, what we want is to calculate the total cost. So I take each one of the groceries in my shopping list, these desired items, and I want to build them up. I'm going to use another fancy function, the reduce function. If you've got a loop that's just building up a number over time, you can say, well, starting with, let's say 0 in our case, give me whatever the cost is so far, give me the next item on the list, and I'm going to figure out how to add those together. Say, okay, well, my correct grocery from my database of groceries, find me the grocery where that grocery's name is the same as that next item. So this loops through my list, finds me the one that matches, and then I'm going to return the cost so far plus that correct grocery's price. When I use the reduce function this way, I'm just saying, go item by item through my shopping list, take that item, find the same thing in my grocery list, and then get me the price of that thing and add it together one after the next. And I can return this as the result of this then here. Just like last time with our eventual shopping list and our eventual price database, a promise always returns a promise. So eventually we'll have the total price. So I've got this eventual total price here. And I can come at the end and say, well, that eventual total price, once you have it, then give me that price and I will print it out. Here in this file, we've done reading from two other files, using that data to build up some final result, and then gave ourselves that final result. It's a pretty complex task, but we can see the whole thing fits right in one small window like this. There isn't a ton of indentation. There isn't a ton going on. And when I run it, it tells me, well, the price for 2 apples is $3.69, 2 apples and a banana, which if we do the math, $1, $2, $3.60 for the 2 apples, plus an extra 9 cents for the banana. $3.69 is indeed correct, and we've got some floating point error there because adding decimals in JavaScript always causes problems, but our program seems to be working. I could stop it there. I could say, well, this is the best we can do. We can actually do slightly better. I'm going to show you one last way that we can use promises. And that is with the await and async keywords. So if I make a async version of this file here, I'm going to start it exactly the same, import my grocery from grocery. I'm going to import the FS. I'm actually going to show you, we can even use this other type of import with our pre-built modules. I can say, well, from FS, I only care about the promises part, and I'm going to call it PromFS. Now, I only get just that one little piece that I was using, this FS promises, and all I have to put is PromFS.read file. Saves me a tiny bit of typing, looks fancy when you do it. But once again, I'm going to start by reading groceries txt, which is UTF-8. This time, however, I'm going to say, you know what? The then and all the promises, that was pretty confusing for me. I want to get the grocery text back right on this line. I want to see how I could do that. And it turns out I only have to add one extra word. If I put the word await here, I'm saying I have some function where its result gives me a promise, and I want to use that thing as the actual value. I don't want to keep it trapped in then functions forever. And it will pause right there and say, okay, I'm not moving on until that promise is satisfied. I could do that with my shopping list text as well. Say, I want to await, stop, pause right here for the shopping list to be finished being read. And now I've got these two bits and I can use them exactly as text. If I had been a little bit smarter, written them as functions here, wouldn't need to grab them out now, but I'm going to just do this work that previously was part of then, where I needed to wait for the contents and then do a thing. Now I can just do it right here. Say, well, my grocery text, split it up, then convert them to grocery objects. Now I've got my price database done right here, straight line code, do one step, then do the next. Similarly, my shopping list text, I can produce a shopping list from that, split it on its new lines, and that's actually all I need to do for that one. And then we can even do our calculation the same. Maybe I realize this function right here, maybe I want this to be out with my grocery. Maybe I decide this is a function that's reusable enough. So I put calculate total price given a shopping list and a price database. We can do this by taking we take our shopping list, we look through the price database, get ourselves that total thing, and return whatever the final value is. I can put more than one export in a file. So here I've got my grocery, I've got my calculate total price that we've written, and then making sure I save my file, I can come back to my async code, import that second thing, come down to the bottom, say the total price is going to be whatever that calculation tells me for this shopping list, for this price database. And then when I print this thing out, I can say the total cost of all my groceries is whatever price I'm given. And when I run this version of the file, we can see once again, it gives us that 369, which is what we wanted. And even though our read file function is doing a bunch of work that takes a while, even though we've got all of these complex components, from main, it looks like We're just following one instruction after the next. I do have one quick note about await. If we're writing a function, and inside that function, we want to use the word await, say we are reading from a file inside of a read groceries, the way that we did back in our original version of this program. The word await is not valid here unless I put the word async in front of my function. And what this actually does is it turns the return of your function into a promise, because async and await have secretly just been promises in a trench coat. That's really only relevant if you're diving super deep into using asynchronous behavior. It's actually why I prefer to just use promises directly instead of using await and async, because they start to pollute everything. But now you've seen a couple different ways that we can read a file in a JavaScript program. We've seen modules that let us import features that aren't natively part of the language. We've even seen how you can write those modules yourself, creating a separate file, creating some features that you want to export somewhere else, and then import in that other file exactly the same way that we did before. Hopefully, this gives you some tools to see how we could start solving more complex problems. And in the next video, we'll start taking a look at how we can use this to do some web programming. So I'll catch you all in the next one.